Welcome back to the channel, Cockwombles. So apparently Britain has a national day. Not for the monarchy, not for parliament, not even for tea. For beer. Beer Day Britain. And I know what you're already thinking. That sounds like something invented by a marketing team after 3 pints and a spreadsheet. But it's real. And the more I looked into it, the more it stopped feeling like a gimmick and started feeling like a very British cultural mirror.
It's Monday, don't groan, don't fear. The Bearded Beer Blog bloke is here. Talking nonsense, beard on show. Grab a brew and watch him go.
So here's what it actually is. Beer Day Britain happens every year on June 15th. It started in 2015 as a coordinated national celebration of beer, pubs and brewing in the UK. And there's a specific moment that defines it. At 7 PM across the country, people are encouraged to raise a glass and say, "Cheers to beer!" It's simple, very simple in fact. But that's kind of the point, because this isn't a festival in the traditional sense. There are no tickets, there's no main stage, no fireworks, just people in pubs, beer gardens, or wherever they happen to be. Now, this is where things get unexpectedly historical. Beer Day Britain is tied to the Magna Carta. Yes, that Magna Carta. The 1215 document that helped shape ideas of law and rights in England. And buried in it is a reference to ale. Clause 35 standardised measures for wine and ale across the kingdom. Which sounds minor until you realise what that implies. Beer wasn't just a drink. It was infrastructure, commerce, daily life, consistency, even governance. And in a very British way, it was important enough to regulate legally. Because even in medieval politics, someone was clearly thinking, actually, this pint situation is getting a bit inconsistent. To understand Beer Day Britain properly, you have to understand what pubs represent in the UK. They're not just places to drink. They're one of the few remaining public spaces that function socially without needing a purpose. No booking, no agenda, no membership. You just go. And that's increasingly rare. Because so much of modern life is structured. Work, home, online, repeat. But pubs interrupt that. They create accidental conversations. They hold local communities together in a way that doesn't really have a digital equivalent. And Beer Day Britain is, in a way, a recognition of that. Not alcohol itself, but the social structure around it. At the centre of Beer Day Britain is the 7 PM toast. Cheers to beer! And I'll be honest, the first time you hear that, it sounds highly performative. But when you zoom out, it actually becomes quite unusual. Because it's one of the few national moments in the UK that isn't political, ceremonial, or commercial in a traditional sense. It's just coordinated participation in something ordinary. A shared pause, a shared drink, a shared gesture. And that's probably why it works better than it should. Because it doesn't demand anything from you. You don't have to believe in it. You just take part. Of course, none of this exists in isolation. British beer culture is complicated. Because on one hand, you've got tradition, cask ales, local breweries, centuries-old pubs. And on the other hand, you've got modern craft beer culture. Small batch, experimental styles, constant reinvention. And both sides sometimes talk about beer like the other side is doing it wrong. Which is quite funny because at its core, it's still just fermented grain and water. But humans will always build identity around simple things, especially when those things are shared socially. Of course, there's also a quieter side to this story. Because while Beer Day Britain celebrates pubs, the number of pubs in the UK has been declining for years. And each closure doesn't just remove a business, it removes a meeting point, a habitual space, a kind of informal community anchor. And that's where this whole thing becomes a bit more meaningful than it first appears. Because celebrating beer is easy. Recognising what it represents is slightly deeper. So why does Beer Day Britain exist at all? Because it reflects something quite specific about British culture. We don't tend to do big national expressions very well, but we do rituals. Small ones, repetitive ones, social ones. Pubs, pints, quiet traditions that sit underneath everyday life. And Beer Day Britain is essentially just a formal label placed on something that was already happening anyway. People meeting, talking, and sharing space. So in the end, Beer Day Britain really isn't about beer. It's about what beer has historically enabled in the UK. Conversation, community, routine, and familiarity. And whether you drink it or not, you can probably recognise what that represents. Because it's not about celebration in the loud sense. It's about noticing something that's always been there. And, I think that's why it works. Let me know in the comments. Do you think the pub still plays the same role in modern Britain? Or is that changing? Either way, cheers to beer.